Hello, my friends. I'm State Representative Tom Calter. This show is called Issues of the Day. In this show, we try to take up those issues that perhaps others aren't as comfortable talking about. In the past, we talked about the economy during the recession. We talked about what was driving our recovery and what people needed to do to make it through the day with Treasurer Steve Grossman. In the past, we've had the police and fire chiefs in to talk about the opiate problem even before people knew it was a problem. So our objective in this show is to bring to you issues that perhaps are not front page news just yet, but they will be. And so we like to have straight talk with credible people that we bring to the show that can share information with you about the issue of this day. Today I'm joined by my friend Paul Collis. Paul is a water commissioner for I always have trouble with this, the Central Plymouth Water Commission. And there's a whole story to be told here. You know, we take our gifts for granted sometimes. One of the greatest gifts we have in this part of Plymouth County is our water supply. And we share that water supply with the city of Brockton. And as a result of the legislation that allowed them to do that, the city of Brockton has a responsibility to maintain the water quality of those water supplies. I'm disappointed to tell you that hasn't happened. And so a year ago, the water commissioners, the 3 water commissioners, were reassembled, thanks in large part to Paul Collis. And now we're working somewhat cooperatively with the city. We've had some bumps to protect those water supplies. So I'd like to introduce to you my friend, Paul Collis, former chairman, current commissioner of the Central Plymouth County Water District. And Paul's going to be doing most of the talking. And what he's about to say to you is very, very informative, very educational. And you're probably going to respond by saying, how did I not know about this? Well, sometimes we take our gifts for granted. Right. Paul's here to protect those gifts, those precious water supplies. And I'd like to, Paul, turn the show over to you by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and then about the commission.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I am a resident of Halifax and retired state employee, an attorney. And a few years ago, as I saw the water quality in the pond that I live on the shores of, East Monpont Pond, I got concerned about the water quality and got involved initially through my town of Halifax and formed a watershed association to get similar concerned citizens to talk about and work on improving the water quality. Through that process, I've learned about the Central Plymouth County Water District system, water system. And as you suggest, it's a pretty amazing situation where back in 1964, the legislature, in response to drought conditions that were in the area, formed a Central Plymouth County Water District. Includes Brockton and 7 towns: East Bridgewater, Halifax, Hanson, Kingston, Pembroke, Plimpton, and Whitman. The district was formed in 1964 and a commission was authorized, and Brockton was also allowed in that act to divert water from Monpont Pond in Halifax and Furnace Pond in Pembroke to Silver Lake to supplement the supply. They've been having a supply from Silver Lake since the late 1800s. The commission worked initially through the 1960s, then it lay dormant for many, many years until just recently, through your assistance, it was revived. And it was revived because there are concerns about the deterioration of the water quality in Monpont Pond, Furnace Pond, and Silver Lake, and there's a need to improve the water quality. So the commission, the towns have an advisory board, and Brockton is on that advisory board as well, and they reappointed the commission. I'm one of the commissioners. There's 2 others, Jack O'Leary, who's the chairman, he's from Plimpton, and Patrick Quinn, who is the Brockton representative, Brockton resident. The commission's been working with Brockton, local state officials, and interest groups to assess the problems with the pond, and the ponds, I should say, and Silver Lake. And mostly they have to do with an affliction that is bothering a lot of water bodies, which is algae. We've got considerable algae in both Furnace Pond and Monponsa Pond, and there's a concern that that's being brought into Silver Lake in Kingston. The concern that's being brought into Silver Lake in Kingston, because under the 1964 law, Brockton is allowed 9 months of the year to divert water from Monponsa Pond and Furnace Pond into Silver Lake, and it reverses the natural flow of these two ponds. And that has an environmental consequence, and as the water quality in these two ponds deteriorated because of algae, that brought a consequence to Silver Lake. What happens in Silver Lake when the water gets there, there is a treatment plant before the water is sent on to Brockton, but still there's a concern about importing water that's got algae into the final drinking water reservoir, if you will. So we have been working with the state DEP and with Brockton and with the local officials to try and deal with this situation. One of the problems is that Brockton management of the ponds is exacerbating the problem. They're keeping the water high and stagnant in these ponds so that they have a sufficient amount to divert when the diversion season comes. The law is very specific that if the water is too low in these ponds, no matter what the season, they can't divert. So Brockton tries to keep the dam gates shut to keep the water up.
The dam meaning the dam.
Yes, the DAM. Thank you for that clarification. So the commission has been working with Brockton quite a bit about managing the water in an environmentally conscious way so that we can promote the natural flow as much as possible while still giving them the water that they're entitled to under the law.
So, Paul, let me just interject for a minute, and I'm going to say this because you're too fine of a gentleman to say it. When you say unintended consequences, I know what you mean. I want to make sure our viewers know what we mean. For the decades that there were not commissioners in place, Brockton, to no fault of theirs, were unilaterally deciding when to divert water from those supplemental bodies of water, Monpont and Furnace.
Right.
And we're deciding when to put water from those bodies into Silver Lake.
That's right.
The legislation from 1964 has conditions with it. Sure, Silver Lake is sharing this abundance of water with its sister neighbor city, Brockton, but Brockton also had responsibilities. They needed to maintain the quality of those bodies of water, and in terms of drinking, in terms of recreation, in terms of water quality. The way I found out about this issue 2 years ago is I was walking a neighborhood in Halifax and I saw Monponsa Pond. And the houses right on Monponsa Pond. I saw canoes that actually had cobwebs across them in the middle of summer. Mm-hmm. And I saw algae on top of the water that you could throw a small stone and it would sit on top. Right. And I asked, what is going on here? And that's when I found out about the 64 law, about Brockton's management practices, and it occurred to me that Brockton was getting all the water they wanted and needed, and in fact were getting more than they wanted and they needed because they were selling water to Whitman and making $2 million a year off Silver Lake water.
That's right.
And there wasn't much consideration for the impact that their water management practices were having on those bodies of water. That's when you came on the scene. I think you're a very humble gentleman. Mm-hmm. That's when you came on the scene. The commissioners were reestablished, and now Brockton is, to some degree, cooperating in water management practices at the direction of the commissioners.
That's right, and I can cite you a couple of examples. When I first got involved in this, Brockton would, on a regular basis, keep the gates in the dam closed, so that even when they weren't diverting water to Silver Lake, they'd keep the gates in the dam closed, and that created this stagnant pool of water in Monponsa Pond and Furnace Pond, and that's a prime condition for algae growth. Right. And they would also do things like divert more water than they needed from these ponds, to the point where I think there was a statistic or study done by the Jones River Watershed Association that 50% of the time they diverted water, Silver Lake was already full.
Right.
And under those circumstances, the 1964 law says they should not be diverting if Silver Lake is full, for obvious reasons, because it goes over the dam.
Into the ocean.
Yes, into the ocean. So it's a waste of water. So there have been some real poor management decisions on water management by Brockton. And now that we've had the scrutiny of the Central Plymouth County Water District Commission, Brockton is now tightening up their act. They are adhering to the law more rigorously because they know we're watching. We have meetings approximately once a month. And by the way, myself and the other two commissioners are volunteers. We're citizens of the district, but we're volunteers. This is all volunteer work. My time here today, everything is volunteer. And people are really committed, and it's good to see. We try to meet monthly, and we try to work with Brockton. Sometimes they don't agree with us. Sometimes they say we don't have the authority we think we have, and that's something we're going to have to work with the state agencies.
We're working on that. Right,
to try and get clarification on what we can or cannot tell Brockton to do. But your point is well taken about Brockton acting unilaterally all these years. And it continues to this day. I mean, recently the Brockton City Council voted to defund the Aquaria desalinization plant.
I'm going to bring you back a step to talk about desal.
Okay.
So part of the '64 legislation required Brockton to develop supplemental sources of water supplies.
Right.
They built, I believe, a $60 million,
I don't know what the cost of it was. Yeah.
but a multi-million, I think it was $60 million desalinization plant, which manufactures clean water out of not so clean water.
Right.
That desal plant, for all intents and purposes, is sitting idle
Yes.
like a paperweight
Right.
as they take this water from Silver Lake.
Correct.
Speak to that, Paul.
Sure. In the mid-90s, actually it goes back to the 80s, the state told Brockton that they were overstressing the natural water resources of Silver Lake, Monpont, and Furnace Ponds. After a decade of negotiation, Brockton signed a consent decree with the state where they agreed to come up with an alternative water source to take some of the pressure off Silver Lake.
So it was post-'64
Right.
legislation.
Right.
Got it.
The consent decree was signed in 1997. Brockton eventually agreed to a contract with a developer who built the desalinization plant, which is actually located on the Taunton River in Dighton.
Called Aquaria.
Aquaria, exactly. And the contract had two components: an annual fee just to have the plant up and running, and a unit cost for when Brockton took water. And the plant was supposed to be capable of providing 5 million gallons a day. Since the plant opened in 2002, I believe it was, Brockton's taken very little of the water. They still have to make the payment, millions of dollars a year, to have the plant ready to produce water, but they have refused to take water from the plant because they say they don't have the money to pay for it.
And that's because there's a variable cost in addition to the fixed cost for
Right.
every gallon of water they
Right.
take.
Once they open the tap on the desal plant, there's a unit cost that they have to pass on to
So
their
they
consumers.
met the spirit of the consent order by making the capital investment.
Right.
Excuse me, they met the letter of the consent order in building the plant and
Right.
meeting that requirement, but not the spirit of providing their 5 million gallons as they take per day out of Silver Lake.
Oh yes.
11?
Oh, yes. They take 11 a day out of
11
Silver.
million gallons a day out of Silver
Silver
Lake.
Lake, yeah.
As the desal plant is not operating.
Right. Exactly. And it's gotten. I'll give you an example. In 2013, Brockton used 3.3 billion gallons, pumped 3.3 billion gallons out of Silver Lake. From Monpont Pond and Furnace Pond, in the 9 months that they're allowed to divert water, they diverted over 2 billion gallons.
Yeah.
So almost 2/3 of the water that they pumped out of Silver Lake came from these two ponds, which the 1964 law calls auxiliary sources.
Yeah, supplemental auxiliary course.
That's
sources.
right. That's right. So they are certainly overstressing the natural resources. They are clearly in violation, in my opinion, of the consent decree they signed with the state, because they haven't used the desalination plant. They continue to overuse Mont Ponce Pond, Furnace Pond, and Silver Lake. And it's unfortunate that the State Environmental Protection Department has not stepped in and done anything about this. I'm hopeful now, the most recent action by the Brockton City Council to not pay for the fixed cost for the Aquaria desalination plant will motivate the State Department of Environmental Protection to step in and do what they should have done a long time ago, which is make Brockton find a legitimate source of water in addition to Silver Lake.
Well, I can tell you, and I can tell our listeners, our viewers, that there's a bunch of prongs being utilized right now to motivate DEP to focus on this issue. It's gone on way too long. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Brockton. I love Brockton. Mm-hmm. My whole family lives in Brockton. Mm-hmm. Brian Creedon, who handles the Water Commissioner's business, was my 9th grade teacher, so I've got no axe to grind with Brockton. But this is fundamentally wrong.
Right.
Their water is being, they're getting their water and leaving us with the liabilities. They're getting the water free,
right,
selling a portion of it to Whitman for $2 million a year and leaving us with the liabilities. Now, I must say, I spoke with one of the councilmen last week, or 2 weeks ago, about this on WATD, and it was news to him. I mean, it was a shock to him that this is the practice of the City of Champions.
Yes.
And he has promised to take this right to Mayor Carpenter and tell the story. I don't think the leaders in Brockton were fully aware until you started doing your work of the resulting consequences of the water management practices. Mm-hmm. So I do see it changing. Those of you that live on Mont Ponce Pond, I think you can be comfortable that due to your work, Paul, and that of the other commissioners, that there is an improvement. There will continue to be an improvement and will continue to get attention. But Brockton's got a major issue. They're not generating their own water. It's really interesting that Silver Lake is a natural body of water for this region of Plymouth County. Yet our towns don't take water from it.
Exactly.
We drill wells.
Right.
We drill wells at great expense to our taxpayers.
Yes.
As the body of water that we're blessed to have in our backyards is pumped 26 miles to
right,
the other end of the region, which was intended to be a temporary water supply for Brockton.
That's right. In fact, the 1964 law has a phrase in it that says, when Brockton turns over the water facilities to the commission. So in the 1964 law, the legislators foresaw that this is, as you say, a temporary condition, and that Brockton would be turning over the facilities to be operated by the commission, because the 1964 law, the real focus was to create a water district of Brockton and the 7 towns. Yes, they also allowed in that law Brockton to divert water, but the concept was a regional district. And what we have now is Brockton's unilateral actions ignoring everybody else in the district.
That's right.
And there's 94,000 people in Brockton. The other 7 towns in the district are around 80,000 people. So it's really pretty close in terms of population. And those people are not, until the commission got reformed with your assistance, those people, those towns were not represented in how the water was managed.
Well, they're certainly well represented now due to the commissioner's actions. And I've got to say that I've been to a lot of your meetings. This is an issue that could very easily become very adversarial. Mm-hmm. And all 3 commissioners, I really admire the 3 of you. You're dealing with it as a matter of law, as a matter of principle, as a matter of process, mm-hmm, and quite honestly, a matter of social justice. In the 64 legislation, Brockton got significant benefits.
Yes.
And nobody from this part of the district fought against it. It's neighbor helping neighbor.
Right.
They also had significant obligations that have been ignored. And the leadership of Brockton seems right now, albeit surprised, very willing now to meet those obligations. And I'm very happy about that. I'm very pleased about that. And, you know, I know that they raised the issue about jurisdiction. They
yes,
said, look, they believe that when they disobeyed a directive of the three commissioners, one gentleman, Brian, said, my reading of the law is different than yours. I believe when they refer to commission, they're referring to the Brockton Water Commissioners.
Right.
And as I've said publicly, I think any first-year law student reading the law, it's crystal clear. The commission in the beginning of the law is defined as you.
Yes.
And that Brian, God love him, was just trying to continue the practice of taking care of Brockton. We're trying to get an opinion, and unfortunately the Attorney General is prohibited by statute from giving us that opinion when there's municipality versus municipality. But we will get an opinion on the law as to what the law means when it says commission. We all know it means the Central Plymouth Water Commission. And we'll get that cleared up very, very, very soon.
Well, I hope so, because without that, it's effectively disenfranchising the other 7 towns in the district. If Brockton is allowed to be supreme, if you will,
yeah,
then the other towns in the district don't have a voice.
Well, you think of it logically for a minute, and again, a simple reading of the law makes clear that you folks have the authority, but you think of it logically for a minute. What law would give one town unilateral control over the water supply?
Especially when it's characterized as a district.
Exactly right. I want to go back to one of your statistics about the amount of water taken out of the supplemental sources. Mm-hmm. You think about that. If 2/3 of the water came from Furnace Brook and Montponset, yeah. How much of the water, clean water, fresh water, went into the ocean because of Brockton's desire to keep Silver Lake so high?
Yeah, I don't have a gallon count on that.
Tough to know.
But the study I saw was 50% of the time when they were diverting water, it was going over the dam and down the Jones River into the ocean.
That's a shame.
Yeah, it's just very, very poor management, negligent management.
It met their needs to make sure that the water source, the quantity of water, was always available to them.
Yes.
But I think what they're beginning to understand now, Paul, their water management practices have created environmental problems in the supplemental bodies of water.
Yes.
And now when those supplemental bodies go into Silver Lake, which is feeding their citizens.
That's right.
They're contaminating the precious source of their water supply.
Absolutely, and they've been trying to ignore that fact for some time, but the fact of the matter is Montponset Pond has been listed as a Category 5 right. water body, which is the worst level by the state DEP for pollutants, and the pollutant in this case is algae. And algae is caused by agricultural operations. We have the cranberry growers on West Montponset Pond. It's caused by development. These towns have grown since the trains came down to this area.
And stagnation.
And stagnation. By Brockton keeping the dam shut, the water stagnates, the hot weather comes, the algae forms, and it stays. It doesn't just go away after the summer. It's seated in the pond. And you're absolutely correct when you say that is then being brought into Silver Lake and threatening the water supplies in Silver Lake. And now they treat the water at Silver Lake, so it should be fine. And the DEP does do testing at the Silver Lake treatment plant. But still, the concern is how long can you keep doing this before things are not fine? And there's got to be a better way. And one of the better ways is to take some of the pressure off these supplemental sources, Montponset Pond and Furnace Pond.
And that's the goal. And
also open up the natural flow for these ponds. So, for example, Brockton's not allowed to divert in the summer under the terms of the 1964 law. Yet they refused to open all the gates in the dam on the West Montponset Pond and let it flow naturally. If they did that, that would improve the algae situation, because the cranberry growing operations are located right near that outlet stream. So whatever runoff comes from the cranberry growing operations would pretty much go into that stream and down through the Great Cedar Swamp and get filtered out by nature. But by keeping those gates closed, the water backs up.
And they're refusing to do that now?
Yes, they're refusing to open all the gates in the dam. And they don't have a reason except to say that's our practice. That's customarily how we do it.
All right, well, we'll follow up with that after this taping. One of the strategies for us may be to send a copy of this taping to the PAC program in Brockton.
It's a great idea.
Because I think when the citizens, when my family in Brockton knows that this water management practice is threatening the quality of the water they drink, that's going to make them look at their own policy differently. The second thing, and I know we're running out of time, there was a break in the water main that delivers water to Brockton from Silver Lake last month, and the city of Brockton had no water for 24 hours, 48 hours.
Almost
like
48
that.
hours, yeah.
That infrastructure is 100 years old.
That's right.
So Brockton's going to have to make a capital investment to either use the desal plant or rebuild that infrastructure, because their citizens aren't going to tolerate 24, 48 hours where they have no water. And
not only their citizens, it affected whole town of Whitman, which is totally dependent on Silver Lake, and it affected a portion of Hanson and Pembroke who get their water from Brockton.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
Paul, we've got a couple of minutes left. Is there any message you want to deliver to the folks, particularly of Kingston, Pembroke, and Halifax, about the future? I mean, you've made great progress through the commissioners, and I know we're beginning to see some modest improvement in the water bodies. I think people need to know that. Assuming we get a clarification on the authority, which is crystal clear, you have the authority, the management practices will be that of the commissioners. Is there any hope? Is there anything you want to share with people that gets you excited about the direction we're moving in?
Yes, I think that one of the things that everybody can do in these communities is to pay attention on a personal level to how you use water. So to make sure that you're fertilizing your lawn without phosphates, to make sure that if possible you wash your car at a car wash and not wash it in your driveway, or if you're in the driveway, use something that doesn't have phosphates, because all that water goes into your streams and into your ponds, and that creates the algae situation that everyone's struggling with. We just had Jamaica Pond in downtown Boston.
That's right, I just read that.
Just got shut down because of algae. So it's really, even on a personal level, you can do a lot to help the water situation. And the other thing is to urge your local officials to stay on top of the situation. All of these local officials, at least two of the towns in your viewing area, Kingston and Pembroke, are part of this water district. Right. And so stay on top of them and make sure that they're in touch with my commission and with the city of Brockton to ensure that the water quality is improved. Well, Paul, I want to thank you for the work you're doing, and the other two commissioners for the time they've put in and the work they're doing. I'm very confident we're making progress, and I feel good about it, and I thank you so much. Great. Thanks for having me. Folks, that's another issue. It's another episode of Issues of the Day. Our water. Let's not take it for granted. And I ask each of you in Kingston, Plimpton, Pembroke, wherever this is being viewed, to talk to your selectmen, talk to your Board of Health. Make sure this issue is top of mind. The commissioners are doing yeoman's work, and they're making great progress, but we need to keep moving the needle on this thing. Paul and I will take care of working with Big Brother in Brockton until they meet all of their responsibilities. They're very good people there, but the unilateral management of our precious resources has caused problems, and that's what we're changing. So again, thank you for joining us. I hope you found this informative. Anytime I listen to Paul, I feel like I'm a little bit smarter. So thanks again, Paul, and have a great weekend. Okay, thank you.